Good morning. My name is Dr. Richard Colgan. I'm an associate professor at the University of Maryland School of Medicine in Baltimore, where I'm also director of undergraduate education for the Department of Family and Community Medicine. We're going to hear some poetry of life stories from medical students and residents from throughout the United States. The idea for this talk came from a quote from Sir William Osler. The quote is, "Nothing will sustain you more potently than the power to recognize in your humdrum routine, or so it may seem, the true poetry of life. The poetry of the commonplace, of the ordinary man, of the plain toil-worn woman, with their loves and their joys, their sorrows and their griefs." I've wanted to share some of the art of medicine with residents and students, and I have just written a book entitled Advice to the Young Physician on the Art of Medicine, in which is a chapter entitled The Poetry of Life. And I invite you now to hear some poems that some students and residents have encountered in patients they've met through the years. Our next presenter is Sam Zager from Harvard Medical School.
Hello, my name's Sam Zager, and I'd like to share a vignette with you called Ellington's Ultimate Triumph. I didn't realize how important Mr. Ellington was to me until after he was gone. I met the 86-year-old man the day he fell at his nursing home and fractured his femur. Before he arrived at the West Roxbury Veterans Hospital in Massachusetts, where I was doing a rotation, all I knew about him, besides the fall, was that he had critical aortic stenosis and a 25% ejection fraction. At the bedside, he was clearly in pain, but trying hard not to broadcast it. He was presented with options because he was mentally intact and decided not to have surgery. So our goal became to manage his pain and do what we could for him, hopefully getting to see him transferred to a chair with a little assistance before we discharged him. I, over the next several days, grew very fond of Mr. Ellington. I loved listening to his stories from his nearly century of living, like running the 1933 Boston Marathon, like living through the Depression, like fighting as an artilleryman in World War II. He also told me happy stories, like when he got married for the first time in his 40s. And when he walked in his 80s, 9 miles or so into Boston, in his words, just to see a friend. This was a gentleman whose body had carried him through a life of vigor. But as he recounted these stories, he seemed split. Part of him was proud of a life well lived, justifiably. Part of him was coming to terms with a very grim diagnosis given his age and comorbidities. And part of him was simply sad, for he was really missing all those who he had loved and lost. They've all gone, he said, every one of them. You can go back, actually. I can remember how I would steel myself and prepare myself when I would enter the room in case I walked in and found his muscles rigid and his skin cold. But I never did find him that way. In fact, I always found him available and willing to endure another medical student interview and exam. He had been given lots of appropriate amounts of medication to keep him comfortable when he wasn't moving, but any tiny movement, like would invariably happen when I gently put a stethoscope to his chest or felt his distal pulses on the unbroken leg side, he would wince in pain, and I just felt horrible. I felt like I was torturing the man every morning dutifully. But he always, more or less cheerfully, consented to me coming in and spending some time with him. One afternoon, I walked in and found physical therapy working with him. It was, on that day, the goal was to simply have him sit on the edge of a bed and put his feet on the floor as an interim step. He had been given medication earlier for breakthrough pain, and the physical therapist was very kind and doing a great job, but it was still excruciating. I don't know if I doubt anyone here has experienced that pain, but when I looked on his face, I could tell that he was really struggling. And it was not surprising that, since he had fallen, he had not done anything near that level of activity. Nevertheless, somewhere deep down inside him, he mustered some sort of courage, some sort of strength that I'm sure he had to count on many times over his lifetime, like during those years of war or during the years of his wife's slow deterioration and death from Alzheimer's. He had to muster that strength and courage. And I saw him dig down and put his feet on the floor. The simplest thing. We do it every day. We've all done it this morning. And yet for this man who was so strong and had been through so much, it was, I imagined, his ultimate physical triumph. He never did get to a chair without assistance. He had to be hoisted. We eventually had to discharge him back to his nursing home. And he passed away 5 days after he was discharged. I think in a lot of ways, Mr. Ellington reminded me of my grandfather, Harry. Harry was strong and very dignified like Mr. Ellington. He was gentle. He was aged but spry. He was old-fashioned, but he was open-minded. Harry was a true gentleman. He was a gentleman in the way he treated people and loved people. He was a gentleman in how he always was willing to learn new things. And in his 70s, he took up tennis because he wanted to play with my grandmother, who was 14 years younger than me, and she played tennis. So he learned how to play that sport. In his 80s, he was still competitive in the seniors brackets. At age 90, on his 90th birthday, he was on the tennis court, and the mayor came to help celebrate his 90th birthday with him. A gentleman of tremendous physical strength and vigor, but ultimately, like Mr. Ellington, Harry's body eventually quit him. And in 2000, he passed away with heart failure. I think the two gentlemen are very intertwined in my mind and my heart. I didn't realize it until I talked with my wife subsequently about it. But they both had incredible courage and dignity and strength. And I think, in a way, I looked upon my time with Mr. Ellington as a chance to revisit with Harry. That's not entirely fair to Mr. Ellington. And it's selfish, I acknowledge. But it's honest. Atul Gawande and others have written about how medical training is only accomplished through the grace and generosity of our patients. Mr. Ellington knew this, and that's why I think he consented to me going in and practicing the art and science of medicine, even though it caused him pain. But he was willing to let me learn, and I think to the extent that I can help my future patients with what I learned from Mr. Ellington, I think that will be Ellington's ultimate triumph. Thank you for your attention.